Now, I did a video in which I defended the 8 original Disney princesses, and I also took the time to sing the praises of other heroines in the animated canon who weren't part of the lineup, because there are plenty of popular Disney gals who aren't official princesses. But if you ask the most popular Disney heroine who isn't a princess, there is only one correct answer.
You mistreat this poor boy the same way you mistreat my people. You speak of justice, yet you are cruel to those most in need of your help.
Silence!
Justice!
Esmeralda, the most prominent woman in Disney's infamous 1996 adaptation of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. The movie was met with scratched heads when it was released, going down in history for scarring many 90s children with its terrifying soundtrack and imagery, and even getting a Razzie nomination. And since it is based on a classic novel by Victor Hugo, the purists were not happy, even though despite all the Disney touches, it's still one of the darkest films they've ever done. But time has been very kind to it, and most are likely to call it an underappreciated gem that has aged very well. And while it may seem as though Esmeralda is near universally loved, it's important to keep in mind that she was initially part of the Disney Princess franchise, but got removed from it because her products didn't sell as well as the others. And her portrayal is a bit of a mixed bag from the Romani viewers in terms of how she represents them.
Look at that disgusting display. Yes, sir.
Before we get into that, I have my conspiracy theory hat on as to why she was a princess and then suddenly wasn't. The original Disney princess lineup contained 8 characters: Snow White, Cinderella, Aurora, Ariel, Belle, Jasmine, Pocahontas, and Mulan. While the emphasis is more on popular heroine rather than royal title, Princess was an easy brand name, since all but 2 of those characters are royal by birth or marry into it. And there were other characters who appeared in magazines early on and seemed to have been tested out as potential princesses before not getting included. Alice even got to be one of the princesses of Heart in the Kingdom Hearts franchise, whereas official Princess Ariel is in the game as a party member, but not one of that group. I assume Alice was dropped or ultimately not included both because of her age and lack of finery compared to the others. Jane Porter from Tarzan received a test, but wasn't included both because of copyright issues with the Edgar Rice Burroughs estate, and also because her brown hair and yellow dress colour scheme was likely too similar to Belle's. Meg from Hercules I already theorised reasons for in another video, but Esmeralda actually was a princess and later removed, the only character this happened to, and the official line was that her products didn't sell as much as the others. But remember the one princess in the franchise who is not royalty by birth, marriage, or cultural translation? Why is Mulan in the line? Because without her, the franchise has only 2 who aren't white. And criticism for Disney's lack of diversity has been happening for as long as I can remember. So having 3 princesses of different ethnicities and from other non-European cultures was clearly a marketing move, especially since Disney made Mulan to try and make nice to China after this film, but that's a whole other story. And long before The Princess and the Frog came about, there was that age-old question: why didn't Disney have a black princess? Now, Esmeralda may be ethnically Romani, but her appearance was based on Halle Berry, and popular YouTuber Princess Weeks even says,
her skin was dark, her hair was big and curly, and even though she had green eyes, her experiences and her identity seemed black to me.
Disney were also going to induct Kida from Atlantis the Lost Empire into the line, at one point having a porcelain figure made for her, but the box office failure put the kibosh on that idea, and Kida is also brown-skinned and voiced by Cree Summer, the most prominent black voice actress at the time, with Kida's features coming from her as well. Atlantis' financial failure is also relevant, because Disney spent the 2000s seeing most of their animated films either underperform or lose money outright, eventually stopping 2D animation altogether after Home on the Range bombed. So since Disney couldn't guarantee a return on investment by creating a new character, the presence of Esmeralda and Kida would have allowed for the appearance of inclusion for the time being. But Esmeralda was dropped from the line in 2008, and what was in the works then?
Well, you wish on that star, sweetheart.
Disney were finally attempting to return to 2D animation and princess films, so they would now have an actual black princess, meaning Esmeralda became superfluous, since Hollywood has never really cared about the Romani as a demographic. Now, I'm not saying I agree with this decision, since I love Esmeralda as a character, and the only other positive Romani characters I can think of are maybe Anna from Van Helsing or the Shivani's from Charmed, and I know some good Romani actors who'd be glad of more roles. But that's enough about Esmeralda as a figurehead for merchandise, let's talk about her as a character.
Who is she? What's her name?
Esmeralda.
If you want an in-depth look at Victor Hugo's reasoning for writing the book Disney's film is adapted from, do check out Lindsay Ellis's video on the movie, but to summarize, Esmeralda is the most prominent woman in the story, attracting the attention of Archdeacon Frollo, and his misogyny towards her is actually toned down in the Disney film, if you can believe that. Here he orders Quasimodo to kidnap her, she's rescued by Phoebus, and she becomes obsessed with him. This doesn't earn him any favours from his jealous fiancée Fleur, but Phoebus has no intention of leaving her, but tries to two-time anyway and is stabbed by a jealous Frollo who is watching the whole thing. Esmeralda is framed for Phoebus's murder, even though he's still alive, and she's declared guilty at a trial for witchcraft as well. Quasimodo rescues her from execution, claiming sanctuary and keeping her in Notre Dame, beginning an actual friendship that started when Esmeralda took pity on him while he was in the stocks for the aforementioned kidnapping. Frollo is furious about this, as he had previously offered to pardon her if she gave herself to him, which she rejected. Frollo also tells another character removed from the Disney version called Gringoire that Parliament has voted to remove Esmeralda from the church, and has him lead an army of the Romani there to save her. Quasimodo thinks they're trying to turn her in and fights them, and the king's soldiers then join in. Esmeralda, meanwhile, has fled Notre Dame with Gringoire and a disguised Frollo, who again offers her the ultimatum of death or life with him. Esmeralda chooses death and is hanged. Quasimodo kills Frollo for this and starves to death once he finds her body and never leaves her side. Oh, and before she dies, it's revealed that she's not Romani by birth and was stolen from her mother as a baby, and they replaced her with Quasimodo, abandoning him not because of his deformity, but because of his red hair. Yeah, perfect material for a Disney film, right?
Ha! Told you! Pay up!
Oh, dear.
Chump.
Well, the novel had been adapted many times before Disney got their hands on it, each one changing the story and the characters' fates, including an opera written by Victor Hugo himself, which has Phoebus exonerating Esmeralda before she's executed, although it's far from a happy ending since he dies from his wound and Esmeralda plans to follow him. Other adaptations tend to spare her as well, but the 1939 Hollywood film is a major jumping off point as far as Disney goes. Made just as World War II broke out, and directed by William Dietler, who had fled Germany for Hollywood like many in the film industry, this is the one that introduces the theme of ethnic persecution, no doubt motivated by the fact that Romani were actively being killed in Europe.
If the others kill it too, why can't we?
They are Frenchmen, you're gypsies, foreigners.
Foreigners. You came yesterday, we come today.
Notably, the plot point of Esmeralda being stolen as a baby is removed, and in this version she sneaks into Paris to ask the king to help her people. The song God Help the Outcasts in the Disney film draws directly from this scene, where Esmeralda is surrounded by people praying for selfish things, and she, on the other hand,
take all I have, but please help my people.
It also highlights many of the stereotypes and misconceptions about the Romani, specifically to have Esmeralda talk about how ridiculous they are, meaning a film made in 1939 is more progressive in its attitude towards them than Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the 10th Kingdom, both made about 70 years later.
If we really had the power of magic, do you think we'd choose to be outcast, to be poor and persecuted always? Surely we'd use it for our own benefit.
Funnily enough, in this film, Esmeralda's persona is a lot more like a typical Disney princess, and she's a wide-eyed idealist who mentions loving animals and tries to see the good in Frollo.
Somewhere in your heart there must be love.
This is the last notable adaptation to keep her as young as she is in the book, since she's played by an 18-year-old Maureen O'Hara, who was not Romani, but she was Irish, another nationality historically demonized and scapegoated before eventually being exoticized, so that adds another layer onto this movie's metatextual reasons for existing.
Praying won't help you. You come from an evil race.
You don't know anything about my people.
The 1956 film is the first to portray Esmeralda as an older 20-something, and definitely ethnically Romani, and they also attempted to be accurate with her costume, as the more famous imagery of Romanian folk dress or the Spanish Romani clothes came much later than when the movie is set, which is only about 50 years after the first caravans arrived in France, and this is likely where Disney took inspiration for her to be barefoot. And of course, this is our first sexy Esmeralda, with the trailer even referring to her as the Temptress, and she's played by 1950s sex symbol Gina Lollobrigida, though she is treated with lots of respect, including giving the coins she earns from dancing to the children of Paris. And that is a major sticking point with Disney's Esmeralda, since the character being shown doing a pole dance and having a sexier image doesn't sit well with a lot of people. Her costume also isn't historically accurate, since a lower class woman would not have worn purple, which was usually reserved for royalty, and she likely wouldn't have worn jewellery so openly, even if she obtained it honestly, because people would assume she stole it.
All right, Gypsy, where'd you get the money?
As it's unknown how a Romani woman would have danced in medieval Europe, her dance at the Feast of Fools is inspired by Italian tarantella. For the record, I am not expecting 100% historical accuracy in a Disney film, especially one that has gargoyles coming to life, but I can't just sidestep it, since it's been suggested that Esmeralda takes a little too much inspiration from European art that exoticizes or stereotypes the Romani. Her appearance is based on Halle Berry, who is a real person and not a figure from Orientalist art, but also not Romani. Similarly, Princess Jasmine may be given accurate Middle Eastern features, but she was also based on Jennifer Connelly, and the hairstyle from 80s bubble braids. And Pocahontas may be a 2D version of her actress Irene Bedard, but she also had inspiration from other women who weren't indigenous, including Naomi Campbell, and Hollywood has historically liked to treat all non-white races as interchangeable. Jasmine may be wearing a crop top to show that she's rebellious and not like a typical princess, and we can note that she only dresses like this in private, wearing a cloak when she sneaks out of the palace and a long dress when appearing before the public, but her costume is uncomfortably similar to a lot of Orientalist art by European travellers who depicted their exotic fantasies in art and presented them as fact. It's very hard to assign intent here, because at the end of the day, most people just want to make a good film and not offend anyone. There was a layout supervisor on Aladdin who was Iranian, and consulted on the designs, just as Pocahontas was verified by the chairman of the United Indians of Virginia, who declared that it was an accurate enough representation, but that of course doesn't mean everyone was happy. And these are questions that can never really be answered, even with regards to how the Romani are depicted in Hunchback.
But the dead go still.
Notably, the song Court of Miracles does portray them in a sinister way, and I've seen arguments for both interpretations. One that says it still demonizes them and comes close to breaking the justice for the oppressed message in a way the 1939 film didn't, and another says that it shows how every group has its share of good and bad, and thus makes for a stronger message that a group should not be persecuted not because people who belong to it are angels, but because it's their basic human right. And in this scenario, the people they nearly hang are heavily associated with the man who has been persecuting them. I can rationalize the choice, but I can also admit that if I was directing the film, it's not one I would make.
That's what they all say.
The movie does, however, refute the stereotypes of the Romani being thieves or cheats, and Esmeralda is accused of stealing money she earned honestly, with Phoebus also highlighting how nonsensical Frollo's crusade against them is.
I was summoned from the wars to capture fortune tellers and palm readers.
And the movie also has these elements of showing the Romani playing into certain ideas of them for entertainment, drawing a line between that and what they're actually like. And while your opinion on Esmeralda being a sexy character depends largely on where you fall on the sex-negative or sex-positive side, I've noticed that a lot of people on the former tend to be telling on themselves without meaning to. After all, it's been noted that prejudice often manifests as concern first, and it's been argued that a lot of sex-negative pop feminism tends to just be misogynistic slut-shaming disguised as protecting women's rights. And there's also a body-shaming and racial angle to this, since there's a generalization that the brown heroines in Disney films are more sexualized than the white ones. And while there are those possible roots in Orientalist art, this more likely demonstrates how both darker-skinned women and women with curvier body types and larger cup sizes are prone to being sexualized by other people, regardless of how they're depicted. If you actually look at Esmeralda's red dress, the skirt is still floor length, and the neckline on that and her main outfit isn't lower than Belle's when she's wearing her gold dress. Within Atlantis, Helga is drawn to look like a vintage femme fatale, given an introduction like this, and complete with a saxophone riff to indicate that she's meant to be arousing. Yet she is ignored from this discussion. And in Peter Pan, Tinkerbell's appearance is so racy it led to an urban legend that she was based on Marilyn Monroe, and she's got friggin' panty shots, in a movie that also has mermaids who are only covered by their hair, strategically placed shells, or flower lace. So this argument is a bit deceptive while also speaking to a greater prejudice. Women are considered sexualized based on what they wear, rather than their actual behavior, and sexualization is treated as shorthand for removal of autonomy. For comparison, the furry characters, Duchess, Maid Marian, and Nala all get moments where they outright make bedroom eyes, Nala doing so during a song titled Can You Feel the Love Tonight? And then there's Miss Kitty, who shows up simply to do a striptease to a song that's literally titled Let Me Be Good to You. And as an aside, Leanna has suggested there be a sister franchise to The Princesses featuring all these furry characters titled the Disney Fluffy Gals, and this needs to happen now. And there's also the fact that the world is kind of terrible to women who have curvier body types or larger breasts.
It seems like no matter what women in today's society do, we can't really get it right because everyone is obsessed with our bodies.
Serena Skyborn did a video commenting on the media's obsession with sexualizing Sydney Sweeney based on her figure, and Leanna has talked multiple times about how a video in which she demonstrated jiggle physics as part of an academic discussion immediately got demonetized. And in the entertainment industry, Christina Ricci infamously got a breast reduction to get better roles. And in the 2010s, as pop feminism took off, It became a thing to reduce the breast sizes of video game characters in the name of being progressive, as if declaring that anyone above a certain size is anti-feminist is somehow going to improve women's rights. And let's take a look at Disney characters such as Ariel, whose costume is a seashell bra, but let's also highlight Meg from Hercules, who outright tries to seduce him, and gets the old strap slip that is always used to code sexual tension, but they're otherwise left out of this discussion. Pocahontas, meanwhile, there's this shot maybe, and elsewhere she is never presented as anything more than pretty, which is different from sexy, though animators did admit they wanted her to be attractive. Esmeralda dances in a floor-length dress that's a little form-fitting in one scene that doesn't even last a minute. But because they're both brown and drawn with curvier figures, they're automatically considered hypersexualized. And there is a difference between sexy and objectified, which is even harder to apply to animated characters because they are essentially objects. But a handy guideline is to read Martha Nussbaum's 7 parameters for treating a character like an object, which I'll link below. And this speaks to a media literacy problem that started in the 2000s and is even worse today, where the questions being asked aren't what is the story saying or how is the trope being used, and instead, this is in the story, therefore it's bad. So let's ask about how Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame is using its tropes and what it is saying about Esmeralda.
Oh, no, you were kind and good and
a gypsy.
For the former, the movie is drawing a distinction between Esmeralda doing a performance to earn a living and what she's like in everyday life. For the latter, the movie is clearly saying that she's a good person who will stand up for the little guy and is significantly more than the lust object that Frollo reduces her to, with at least 2 shots practically deifying her. And while Phoebus and Quasimodo are definitely into that performance, here's a useful analogy. It's okay to admire a pretty picture as long as you don't try to rip it off the wall. Frollo is the one who reduces Esmeralda to a 2-dimensional witch or siren who bewitches his pure, righteous heart and uses that as an excuse to burn down half the city and persecute innocent people. He might sexualize or exoticize her, but the narrative itself does not. The movie is specifically pointing out that she is more than what Frollo sees her as. And I've seen people say that the movie should have made her more modest to emphasize that Frollo would do that to her no matter what she wore, which to me sounds more like a backhanded complaint that the narrative is asking us to root for a female character who is not respectable. And the fact that this response has so much traction is an indicator that we need more stories like this, because Frollos of the world exist, and their views first manifest as concern. And I'm obviously extremely biased here because I honestly think that Esmeralda is one of the best characters Disney has ever created.
Are you always this charming, or am I just lucky?
It has obviously been a thing for quite a while, ever since the rise of the women's movement, that adaptations of certain stories will try to make the female characters more progressive. And often the easiest thing to do is give them some action scenes. Of course, simply making a female character an action girl doesn't automatically make her a good character, and by the 2010s there was already backlash towards this idea that having a woman swinging a sword or firing a gun was a substitute for good writing. So this trend is often looked at less favourably, often forgetting what it's like when it's done well. Disney were especially good at this in the Renaissance, since The Little Mermaid gives the title character a complete overhaul into not just being a brave adventurer who fights sharks and attempts to battle the Sea Witch, but also gives her a compelling inner journey about how she's out of place where she comes from, and her desire to join the human world isn't just because of a man she's projecting onto like in the original, but a journey of finding both internal and external acceptance. Ariel does do plenty of cool things, but she's also a great character, and my favourite Disney princess for a multitude of reasons. Disney's Esmeralda may be a street-smart action girl who sasses men that disrespect her and duels with Phoebus inside the cathedral, but she's also a brave revolutionary who will stand up for the oppressed when no one else will, and challenge authority figures at great personal risk to herself. And she's also a G-rated exotic dancer. She is both a very sexy lady who men are attracted to, but 2 different men fall in love with her because of her bravery, kindness, and compassion, while the one who reduces her to a lust object is the villain. She is most definitely not a respectable woman in the eyes of society, but the movie presents her as someone of valor and virtue. She gets a pole dance, and then this shot almost deifies her. While Ariel, Jasmine, and Pocahontas had played around with the Madonna Hall complex, Esmeralda shoots it straight to hell.
And maybe Frollo's wrong about the both of us.
And I just love so many individual things that she does throughout the film, with the most obvious being her standing up to Frollo in the square, and having the courage to stop the mob, as well as the smarts to challenge the man in charge, which puts the crowd on her side.
Then it appears we've crowned the wrong fool. The only fool I see is you!
Her rescuing Phoebus twice in the same scene is a real yeah moment. And then the softer scenes, like her reassuring Quasimodo he's not a monster under the pretense of reading his palm, or pretty much the entirety of God Help the Outcasts, which I think does a lot to make Esmeralda a 3 if not 4-dimensional character as opposed to just a feisty action girl. And I think it's this, rather than the cool moments, that solidify her popularity.
I ask for nothing, I can get by.
I mean, a lot of victims of bullying and abuse form connections to these characters because fictional people can't bully you the way real ones can, and we all like to imagine that our favourite characters would come to our defence and stand up for us. With Esmeralda, we see her doing just that.
What do they have against people who are different anyway?
Her morals are clearly defined. She's not just trying to get justice for her people, she won't tolerate anyone being mistreated by authority figures, even if they were part of the system prior to doing the right thing. She's not motivated by attacking people out of revenge, she legitimately wants the world to be a better place for everyone. And it's a little sad that all of this nuance and character depth often gets ignored or dismissed in favour of, is she too sexy? I've also heard it suggested that this is the reason her products didn't sell as much as the other princesses, since it's usually the parents buying the stuff. And since it seems as though Esmeralda's voice actress is having something of a comeback, I feel like throwing my 2 cents in there before Be Kind Rewind inevitably does it better.
I'm just not interested in being some poster girl for women's rights.
So, Demi Moore. She was one of many young stars who broke out in the early 80s, collectively called the Brat Pack, but she became a star in her own right with 1990's Ghost, that is best known in my book for inspiring the charmed episode Dead Man Dating, but also netted Whoopi Goldberg an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress, making her only the second black woman to win an acting Oscar. And you'll notice that despite the other nominations for Best Picture and Screenplay, Demi was conspicuously absent from the acting category. That would be a recurring through line in her career, especially in the 90s. In plenty of acclaimed films that were frequently also #1 at the box office, but never anywhere near the acting nominations, even when the films themselves or other cast members were. And this rather echoes how Esmeralda has often gone unsung. Despite proving her range by starring in some extremely varied productions, Demi had also been topless in 6 different films by 1996, as well as appearing nude twice on the cover of Vanity Fair. In fact, receiving $12 million for her role in Striptease because she was the only major star willing to do nudity. And she got an ungodly amount of shit for that one in particular, with her later describing the reaction being as if I'd betrayed women, and Jennifer Tilly calling it out as being down to very hypocritical cattiness. The press also treated her as if she'd sold out by getting that paycheck, which made her the highest paid actress in Hollywood, and they nicknamed her Gimme Moore.
You looked really pretty.
No, I didn't.
You looked great.
In actuality, her reasons for taking striptease were wanting to explore the story of a single mother trying to take care of her child in the best way she knew how. Since the story revolves around a woman who becomes an exotic dancer to fund a custody battle, and if you watch it alongside Showgirls, which came out the year before, you'll notice a clear difference between how each film treats women.
You are a whore, darling.
Hey, this is honest work. You have nothing to be ashamed of.
I know that, and you know that. But the judge won't.
And in fact, so many of her roles explored these sorts of taboo topics, such as Indecent Proposal, where she plays a married woman who agrees to spend a night with a billionaire because she and her husband need the money he's offering. And that was something she herself had experienced at only the age of 15. Yikes. Or Disclosure, where her character falsely accuses her ex of workplace harassment as revenge, and made in the wake of the Clarence Thomas hearings, with her standing by the choice, stating that it was very rare to portray such an incident where the woman was the aggressor. Her willingness to play women who weren't respectable in the eyes of the public naturally went hand in hand with the desire to challenge the status quo, which brought us to 1997 and the role she should have won an Oscar for.
There was an intel slot available aboard the USS Polk, but they told me that submarines had no bathroom facilities for women.
Did that piss you off?
Yes, ma'am, it did.
Good.
G.I. Jane is sadly best remembered now for its association with these two, but it's actually a well-made drama about Jordan O'Neill, a woman who undergoes SEAL training as part of a test to see if women can be put in direct combat, and is considerably smarter and far more taboo than many other films trying to examine gender politics.
Just treat me the same, no better, no worse.
It unpacks benevolent sexism on the part of the higher-ups, women's rights being used as a smokescreen for good PR, and the double standards when it comes to the death or harm of women compared to men, and how all the above can limit career advancement for women. Also, Jordan can challenge or refute them to prove her worth. and the famous head-shaving scene wasn't even in the script, and suggested by Demi herself, as was her now famous short haircut in Ghost, as she'd been cast while her hair was long. So this challenging of societal and gender norms was very much her branding, and so it seems almost like a no-brainer to have Esmeralda be played by her. In fact, G.I. Jane came out only a few months after Hunchback of Notre Dame, and they're both my two favourite performances of hers, and yet they both got Razzie nominations. Because the aforementioned striptease had come out before them, and that was following on the heels of an infamously terrible adaptation of The Scarlet Letter. So the stink was in the air that the highest paid actress was in 3 consecutive box office failures, and it even caused Disney to falter, since Hunchback grossed $25 million less than Pocahontas, as well as being a rare Disney film to get a Razzie nomination and the only Renaissance movie to not be nominated at the Oscars. While we can blame scratched heads at the film's subject matter, it's easy to theorise that the stink surrounding Demi Moore's career choices had some hand in it too. As, out of context, G.I. Jane is almost the perfect Oscar narrative. A longtime star valued mainly for her beauty, demonstrating her versatility in a story examining sexism, also sacrificing her vanity and undergoing a physical transformation. But we could also argue that she wasn't so much too beautiful to be taken seriously as didn't care what you thought of her and was going to challenge the status quo, which rarely results in immediate popularity, but it is a very Esmeralda attitude towards things.
Seek life elsewhere. Suck my...
And now, nearly 30 years later, it seems like she's finally getting recognition, which is honestly very sweet to watch, and I'm intrigued to see what she does next. Anyway, I'm going to try and keep this conclusion short, since I feel like we already know that Esmeralda is one of the best Disney characters, and I've wasted enough time explaining why. But I also hope that younger viewers who don't have the context of growing up in a slightly less Puritan time can understand what this character's existence meant then, and means now. Which of course isn't to invalidate anyone who would prefer that the most recognisable Romani character in fiction is something a little different, which should be the cue for more stories, and varied ones at that, and more work for Romani actors. And if anyone who's interested would like to support such a project, do keep an eye on this film, which friends of mine are developing about the Romani in World War II. You know Esmeralda would sure support them. Was that a decent segue?
Now I'm afraid.
Anyway, Disney, make Esmeralda an official princess again, and if you make her product super affordable, we'll all make sure she outsells her competition.